You said it was a hunting trip, Lisa whispered, the wind biting through her thin linen dress. The forest behind them was a wall of black, humming with the low, predatory growls of the bloodwood. Her stepmother, Ilara, stood by the running engine of the rusted truck, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "It is, darling, but you aren't the hunter." Ilara tossed a bloody haunch of raw meat at Lisa's feet. The scent hit the air, metallic and sharp. "Mother, please, don't call me that," Ilara sneered, slamming the truck door. "The wolves are hungry, Lisa, and finally you're useful." The tires spat gravel, the taillights bleeding into the dark, leaving Lisa alone with the meat, the silence, and the glowing yellow eyes emerging from the trees. The scent of blood was a siren song in the bloodwood, and Lisa knew she had only minutes. She didn't scream. Screaming wasted breath, and breath was life. She kicked the raw meat as far down the embankment as she could, praying the wolves would follow the easy meal rather than the scent of her fear. She scrambled up a jagged oak, her palms scraping raw against the bark. Below, the brush parted. They didn't come as a chaotic pack, but as silent, fluid shadows. Dire wolves. Massive, muscle-corded beasts with fur the color of ash and midnight. They sniffed the meat, but their eyes, intelligent, calculating, rose to the branches where Lisa clung, trembling. They didn't attack. They waited. Hours bled into a freezing dawn. Exhaustion pulled at Lisa's limbs. Her grip faltered. With a sharp crack, the branch beneath her gave way, sending her plummeting into the center of the waiting pack. She braced for teeth. Instead, a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the earth, halting the wolves. From the dense fog stepped a wolf larger than the rest, its coat a stark, blinding white. The Wolf King. He didn't look at her with hunger, but with an ancient, assessing wisdom. He nudged her prone, shivering form with a massive snout. It was a gesture of claiming, not killing. 15 years passed. The girl left to die became a phantom of the bloodwood. Lisa learned the language of the pack. The subtle shifts in posture, the meaning behind a chuff or a bare-fisted snarl. She wore pelts and walked barefoot, her senses sharpened beyond human capacity. She was the princess of the Ash Pack, fiercely protected by the White King. She forgot the cruelty of her stepmother. She forgot the softness of a bed. She only knew the hunt, the pack, and the wild, untamed freedom of the forest. Until the intruders came. Lisa was perched high in a sentinel pine when she smelled them. Metal, sweat, and something else. A heavy, dominating musk that made the fur on the back of the wolves' necks stand up. Werewolves. Shifters from the civilized territories. She watched them move through her forest. A hunting party of 5, heavily armed, arrogant in their heavy boots. At their center strode a man who commanded the space around him simply by existing. He was tall, his broad shoulders clad in dark leather, his hair the color of onyx. His eyes, sweeping the tree line, were a piercing, storm cloud gray. Alpha King Cain. He paused, tilting his head. He inhaled deeply, his gaze locking onto the exact cluster of branches where Lisa hid. Her breath hitched. He couldn't see her through the dense pine needles, but he knew she was there. "Hold," Cain commanded, his voice a rich, dark velvet that sent an involuntary shiver down Lisa's spine. The hunting party stopped instantly. "What is it, Alpha?" His second in command, a scarred beta, asked. "We aren't alone," Cain murmured, his eyes never leaving Lisa's tree. "There's a scent, wild, pure." Lisa gripped her bone-handled dagger. The White King had warned her of the shifter packs. creatures of two worlds, belonging to neither. Arrogant, dangerous. A younger shifter, eager to impress, raised a silver-tipped crossbow. I'll flush it out. Before Cain could countermand, the bolt flew. It missed Lisa but struck a young pup of the ash pack who had wandered too close to the clearing. The pup yelped, a high, agonizing sound that cut through the silence. Logic vanished. Instinct took over. With a feral scream, Lisa dropped from the canopy. The hunting party raised their weapons, a chorus of metallic clicks echoing in the clearing. But Cain raised a single hand, demanding absolute stillness. He stared at the wild woman, holding his soldier hostage. She was a vision of chaotic beauty. Tangled dark hair cascaded over shoulders wrapped in furs. Dirt and war paint smeared her sharp cheekbones. But it was her eyes that captivated him. Fierce, unyielding, burning with the protective fury of a mother wolf. "Lower your weapons," Cain ordered, his tone brokering no argument. "Alpha, she's feral," the scarred beta protested. "I said, lower them." Cain took a slow, deliberate step forward. He kept his hands visible, palms open. "I am Alpha King Cain of the Obsidian Pack. We meant no disrespect to your territory." Lisa kept the blade steady, her eyes darting between the men. The injured pup whimpered behind her. Two adult dire wolves flanked her, teeth bared, rumbling a warning at the shifters. "Your metal bit my pack," Lisa snarled, struggling to form the human words. "You bleed for it." Cain's gaze shifted to the pup. The silver bolt had grazed its flank. A minor wound, but silver burned shifters and wolves alike. "A mistake," he said softly, his eyes returning to Lisa. The sheer intensity of his stare was disorienting. It felt heavy, electric. "A mistake I will rectify." He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a small glass vial. "Healing salve. Not silver. It will stop the burning." He tossed it. Lisa caught it effortlessly with her free hand, never taking the blade from the shifter's throat. She sniffed the vial. Herbs. Comfrey, yarrow, no poison. She tossed it backward without looking, and the White King stepped from the shadows, catching the vial gently in his jaws to take to the pup. Cain's men gasped as the massive white dire wolf appeared. Even Cain's eyes widened slightly. The legends of the Bloodwood were true. "Release my man," Cain said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into an alpha command that usually forced submission from any wolf. Lisa felt the weight of his command press against her mind, a heavy, suffocating blanket. But she wasn't a shifter. She was a human raised by true wolves. She didn't submit. She bared her teeth. "He leaves his weapon. Then he goes." A muscle feathered in Cain's jaw. He was infuriated, yet undeniably intrigued. No one resisted his command. No one. "Do it," Cain told his soldier. The terrified young man unclasped his crossbow and let it fall to the dirt. Lisa shoved him away and scooped up the weapon in one fluid motion, retreating into the shadows of her wolves. "Who are you?" Cain asked, taking another step forward, driven by a sudden, intense need to know the name of this wild creature who defied him. "I am the Ash," she whispered, the forest seeming to swallow her words as the fog rolled in thicker. "Stay out of my woods, Alpha King." When the fog cleared, she was gone, leaving only the scent of pine, rain, and an intoxicating wildness that Cain knew he would never forget. For weeks, Cain could not focus on the affairs of the Obsidian Pack. The sprawling stone fortress of his kingdom felt stifling. The political squabbles of his council utterly trivial. All he saw when he closed his eyes were fierce, wild eyes and a blade pressed to a throat. "You're distracted, Cain," muttered Silas, his beta and oldest friend, tossing a ledger onto the heavy oak desk. "The border disputes with the Crescent Pack are escalating, and you're staring out the window like a lovesick pup." I am not lovesick," Cain growled, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "I am curious." Silas scoffed. "Curious about the feral woman in the Bloodwood? The council thinks you're mad for not burning the forest down after she attacked one of ours. She was protecting her own." Cain countered, his mind flashing back to the massive White King. "She isn't just surviving out there, Silas. She's leading them. Or at least they treat her as royalty. She's human, Cain. A feral human. What does it matter?" Cain couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain the pull he felt toward her, the strange, magnetic tug that defied logic. It wasn't just a mating pull. It was something deeper, something ancient recognizing its counterpart. "I'm going back," Cain announced, standing up abruptly. Silas groaned. "Alone? Are you trying to get yourself killed?" "If she wanted me dead, she had the chance." Cain strapped his broadsword to his back. "I need to know who she is." The journey back into the Bloodwood was different this time. Cain went alone, leaving his alpha aura suppressed, moving quietly. He didn't track her by scent. She was too good at masking it. He tracked her by the silence of the forest. Where the birds stopped singing, where the prey animals vanished, that's where the Ash Pack hunted. He found her by a secluded waterfall, washing a fresh kill. She had discarded her heavy furs, wearing only a lightweight tunic. Cain froze in the brush, captivated. The dirt and war paint were washed away, revealing skin the color of toasted almonds and striking, delicate features. She was breathtaking. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped him cold. It was the mark on her right shoulder, a jagged, pale scar, distinct and deliberate, shaped like a crescent moon with a star in the center. Cain's breath caught in his throat. He knew that mark. It was the branding of the Blackwood estate, a wealthy human family that lived on the edge of the territories. 15 years ago, they had reported their young daughter dead, dragged off by wolves during a hunting trip. A tragic accident, they had claimed. She wasn't feral. She was a stolen life. She was Lisa Blackwood. Before Cain could process the revelation, a twig snapped under his boot. It was a mistake a novice wouldn't make, driven by his sheer shock. Lisa spun around, instantly armed with a crude spear, her eyes scanning the tree line. "Show yourself," she demanded, her stance coiled and ready. Cain stepped out of the brush, hands raised in surrender. "I didn't come to fight." Lisa's eyes narrowed in recognition. "The Alpha King. You are foolish to come back alone. I came to bring you something," Cain said, his voice softer than he intended. He didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled a small, silver locket from his pocket, an item he had retrieved from the Blackwood Estate's public memorial years ago, a piece of local history. He tossed it onto the moss between them. Lisa hesitated, then crept forward, poking the locket with her spear before picking it up. She flickered it open. Inside was a faded picture of a young girl with a crescent moon birthmark, no, a brand, on her shoulder. Lisa stared at the picture, a violent tremor racking her frame. The memories she had buried under 15 years of dirt and blood rushed back. The cold wind, the rusty truck, the cruel smile of her stepmother, Alara. You, Lisa choked out, looking up at Cain, her eyes wide with a sudden, devastating vulnerability. Who are you to bring me ghosts? I am the man who knows your name, Cain said, taking a step closer, the magnetic pull undeniable now. Your name is Lisa, and you were not abandoned to the wolves. You were murdered. The air in the obsidian-packed fortress smelled of polished stone, roasted meats, and the sharp tang of ozone. Magic and shifter energy woven into the very walls. To Lisa, it smelled like a trap. She stood in the center of Cain's private solar, wearing a simple linen dress that felt coarse against skin used to soft furs. Her bone dagger was tucked discreetly against her thigh. She hadn't wanted to come, but the revelation of the locket of Ilara had cracked the icy armor she'd built around her human heart. Cain hadn't forced her. He had offered answers. And the White King, with a solemn nudge to her shoulder, had signaled his permission for her to seek her truth. You look uncomfortable, Cain said, entering the room. He had shed his battle leathers for a dark, tailored suit that emphasized the broad span of his shoulders. It's too bright in here, Lisa muttered, avoiding his gaze. Too many hard lines, no place to hide. Cain moved slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. You don't need to hide here, Lisa. She flinched at the name. It felt like a garment that belonged to someone else, someone weak who cried for a mother who didn't exist. Don't call me that. The Ash call me Lyra. Lyra. Cain tested the name, his voice a low thrum that sent a strange warmth through her. It suits you. Wild, sharp. He gestured to a map spread across a heavy wooden table. I've had my scouts look into the Blackwood estate. Ilara is still there. She inherited everything when your father died. Lyra moved closer, her movement silent, predatory. She studied the map, though the human symbols meant little to her. My father is dead. A hunting accident, Cain said gently, his eyes searching her face. 5 years ago. They say he was attacked by a rogue bear. Lyra's jaw tightened. Bears do not hunt in Blackwood territory. The terrain is wrong. She met Cain's eyes, the silver of them striking in the sunlight. She killed him, just like she tried to kill me. I suspected as much. Cain agreed. She's a powerful woman now, deeply entrenched in local politics, even dealing with some of the fringe shifter packs. Touching her won't be easy. I don't want to touch her, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I want to tear her throat out. Cain didn't flinch at the violence. Instead, an edge of dark approval flashed in his eyes. We will get justice, Lyra. But we have to be smart. You can't just walk into human territory covered in war paint and blood. Why not? She challenged. Because. Cain stepped closer, the magnetic pull between them intensifying. If you go in as a feral creature, they will hunt you like one. But if you go in as Lisa Blackwood, the rightful heir, you strip her of her power before you even strike. Lyra considered this. It meant playing the human game. It meant returning to the weakness she despised. But she remembered the rusty truck, the smell of the bloody meat, the cold indifference in Ilara's eyes. Teach me, she commanded. The transformation was agonizing. Lyra had to relearn the restrictive rules of human society, how to sit, how to speak without growling, how to mask her heightened senses when the cacophony of the fortress overwhelmed her. Cain was her constant shadow. He hired tutors, but he oversaw every lesson. The physical proximity was a constant test of her control. His scent, cedar, rain, and raw power was a narcotic. She found herself tracking him, her gaze lingering in the corded muscles of his forearms when he rolled up his sleeves, the strong line of his jaw when he concentrated. "You're holding the fork too tightly," Cain murmured one evening during dinner, his voice close to her ear. Lyra practically crushed the silver utensil. "It feels unnatural. Hands were meant to tear." Cain chuckled, a deep, rich sound. He reached over, his large hand covering hers. His skin was incredibly warm. He gently pried her fingers loose, guiding them into the proper grip. The spark of electricity at his touch made her breath hitch. "Patience, Lyra," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. The gray depths were stormy, intense. "You are learning to wear a disguise, nothing more. Underneath, you are still the ash." She stared back, the civilized facade slipping. And what are you, Cain? A king in a stone cage?" His thumb brushed the back of her hand, a fleeting, intimate gesture. "I am a man trying very hard to remember that you are my guest, not my prey." The tension in the room thickened, air crackling with unsaid words. The mating pull was undeniable now, a tether drawing them together. But Lyra resisted it. To submit to it meant tying herself to his world, a world she wasn't sure she could survive in. The next day, Silas, the beta, burst into the training room where Lyra was sparring with Cain, she with a wooden staff, he unarmed. "Alpha," Silas said, looking uneasy. "We have a problem." Cain parried a strike from Lyra, catching her staff and holding it firmly. "Speak." "The Crescent Pack," Silas reported. "Their Alpha, Thorn, is demanding a parley. He claims we are harboring a rogue human who attacked his scouts near the Bloodwood border." Lyra stepped back, lowering her staff. They were not scouts. They were poachers. They killed a doe in Ash territory. Cain's expression hardened. The Crescent Pack was notoriously aggressive, looking for any excuse to challenge Obsidian territory. Thorn knows better than to press a claim in the Bloodwood. He's looking for a fight. He says if we don't hand her over, it's an act of war. Silas added grimly. Cain looked at Lyra, the softness he had shown her moments before, replaced by the cold calculation of a king. "No one touches what is mine." Lyra bristled at the word mine. She belonged to no one but the Ash. But before she could argue, Cain turned to Silas. "Tell Alpha Thorn I will meet him at the neutral grounds, and I will bring the rogue so he can make his accusations to her face." The neutral grounds were a barren clearing halfway between the Obsidian and Crescent territories. The air was tense, heavy with the conflicting sense of dozens of agitated shifters. Cain stood tall, projecting absolute authority. Lyra stood at his side. She was dressed in human clothes, dark trousers and a tailored leather jacket. But she hadn't hidden her wildness. Her hair flowed free, and her eyes, sharp and predatory, tracked every movement in the opposing camp. Alpha Thorn was a massive, scarred brute who smelled of stale blood and cheap liquor. He sneered as Cain approached. "You bring a human pet to a parley, Cain?" Thorn mocked, his voice booming. "Has the Obsidian King gone soft?" "I bring the woman who claims your men were poaching in the Bloodwood." Cain replied evenly, his voice carrying effortlessly. Thorn spat on the ground. "She lies. She attacked my men without provocation. Hand her over and we walk away. Refuse and we take her by force." Lyra stepped forward before Cain could stop her. The human disguise fell away completely. She moved with fluid, terrifying grace, stopping just inches from Thorn. The Crescent Alpha towered over her, but she didn't flinch. Your men smelled of dead deer and fear, Lyra said, her voice a low, raspy growl that carried across the silent clearing. They died like cowards. Thorn roared, raising a massive hand to strike her. Before his hand could fall, Lyra moved. She didn't draw her dagger. She didn't use human martial arts. She moved like the ash. She ducked beneath his swing, grabbing his wrist, and twisted with her entire body weight, using his momentum against him. With a sickening crack, Thorn hit the dirt. Lyra's knee pressed against his throat. The clearing erupted in chaos. Crescent wolves began to shift, snarls ripping through the air. Obsidian soldiers drew their weapons. "Knee hold," Cain commanded, his alpha voice slamming into the clearing with physical force. Several crescent wolves whined and dropped lower. Lyra pressed harder on Thorn's throat, her eyes burning. "Do they attack?" she asked Cain, her tone casual, though she was coiled tight as a spring. Cain looked at Thorn's beta, a wiry man who looked pale and terrified. "Your alpha challenged my guest. He lost. Take him and leave, or we will finish this." The beta scrambled forward, gesturing frantically for his men to stand down. Lyra released Thorn, shoving him back in disgust. She didn't look at Cain as she walked back to the obsidian line. She just wiped her hands on her trousers. As they returned to the fortress, the silence between them was different. It wasn't tense. It was heavy with realization. "You could have started a war," Cain said quietly when they were finally alone in his study. "I finished a fight he started," Lyra countered, unapologetic. "The ash do not show the belly to an enemy." Cain stepped closer, crowding her against the heavy oak desk. The air in the room felt thick, difficult to breathe. "You aren't in the Bloodwood, Lyra. You have to think of the consequences." "I only think of survival," she whispered, looking up at him. Cain reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with a single, reverent finger. The touch sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to her core. "You don't have to just survive anymore," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "You are safe here." "I don't know how to be safe," Lyra admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Let me show you," Cain breathed, before closing the distance and pressing his lips to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an explosion. Lyra gasped, her hands instinctively grabbing his lapels, pulling him closer. The wildness in her answered the ancient power in him. A desperate, undeniable collision of two solitary souls finally finding their match. The kiss was a claim, a promise, and a warning that everything was about to change. The kiss ended, but the electricity remained, humming in the quiet space between them. Lyra stepped back, her chest heaving, her fingers still curled into the fine fabric of Cain's suit. She expected to feel fear, the instinct to flee her predator. Instead, she felt an anchoring weight. Cain didn't push. He simply watched her, his gray eyes dark with a primal promise. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Tomorrow, we take back what is yours. Tonight, you rest." The next evening, the Blackwood estate was ablaze with light. Alara Blackwood was hosting her annual charity gala, a glittering event that drew the wealthiest humans and the most discreet, influential shifters from the borderlands. Lyra sat in the back of Cain's armored luxury sedan, staring out the tinted windows as they pulled up the winding, meticulously manicured driveway. The memory of the rusty truck overlay the pristine pavement like a ghost. "Breathe," Cain murmured, seated beside her. Lyra looked down at herself. The transformation was complete. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her athletic frame like a second skin. Her wild hair was tamed into an elegant cascade, held back by diamond pins that felt heavier than her bone dagger. The dagger itself was strapped to her thigh, hidden by a strategic slit in the dress. "I smell perfume," Lyra muttered, wrinkling her nose. "Fake flowers and greed. It masks the rot beneath. Then we will expose the rot." Cain offered his arm as the driver opened the door. He was in a bespoke black tuxedo, radiating a contained, lethal authority that made the estate's security guards instinctively step back. As they entered the grand ballroom, heads turned. The Obsidian King rarely attended human events, and the woman on his arm was a breathtaking mystery. Lyra scanned the room, her ash instincts analyzing every threat. She noted the heavy, reinforced doors, the position of the armed guards disguised as waiters, and the subtle, musky scent of shifters mingling with the human elite. Then she saw her. Alara stood at the center of the room, holding court. She wore emerald satin and a necklace of staggering diamonds. Time had barely touched her. She still looked sharp, polished, and terrifyingly cold. Lyra's breath hitched. A phantom pain flared in her shoulder where the crescent moon brand lay hidden beneath her silk gown. Cain felt her tense. He didn't speak, but his hand tightened over hers, a silent, unshakable pillar of support. "Play the game, Lyra. Let her look you in the eye before you strike." They glided across the marble floor. As Cain approached, the crowd naturally parted, intimidated by the sheer density of his alpha aura. Alara noticed the movement and turned, her practiced, empty smile firmly in place. "Alpha Cain," Alara purred, extending a hand dripping in rings. "What an unexpected honor. We rarely see you this far past the border." Cain didn't take her hand. "Circumstances demanded it, Alara. I brought a guest who was very eager to see your estate." Alara's gaze shifted to Lyra. For a second, annoyance flashed in the older woman's eyes, quickly followed by confusion. And then, a slow, dawning, absolute horror. The color drained from Alara's face, leaving the heavy makeup looking like a mask painted on a corpse. Lyra smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was a baring of teeth. "Hello, stepmother," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying over the string quartet playing in the corner. "Did you think the wolves would be hungry forever?" The crystal champagne flute in Alara's hand shattered, spilling expensive wine over her emerald gown like blood. The music abruptly stopped. A breathless hush fell over the immediate circle of guests. "Lisa," Alara whispered, stumbling back a step. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. "No, that's impossible. You're dead. I was forged in the dark you left me in," Lyra replied, taking a deliberate step forward. The polished human facade she had worn all evening cracked, revealing the lethal predator beneath. "You stole my father's life, his legacy, and you tried to steal mine." Alara's shock was profound, but she was a survivor of a different kind. Her terror morphed into desperate, venomous calculation. She looked at Cain, then back at Lyra, a manic laugh bubbling from her throat. "You bring a feral stray into my home and accuse me of murder?" Alara shouted, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the ballroom. "Guards, seize them. They are threatening my life." The waiters Lyra had spotted earlier dropped their trays. They didn't draw standard human sidearms. They drew heavy tactical weapons. Simultaneously, a group of guests near the exits shed their heavy coats. The unmistakable scent of wet dog and stale blood flooded the room. Lyra recognized the wiry man, leading them immediately. It was Thorn's beta from the Crescent Pack. "A neat arrangement you have, Alara," Cain observed, his voice cutting through the rising panic of the human guests fleeing the room. "Funding rogue shifters in exchange for private muscle. Kill them both," Alara commanded, retreating behind a wall of mercenaries. "The Obsidian King has gone rogue. Thorn will reward us for bringing him his head." The Crescent Beta sneered. "With pleasure." He leveled a specialized rifle at Lyra. But before he could pull the trigger, Cain moved. He pushed Lyra behind him, taking the shot. A silver net, weighted with lead, exploded from the barrel, wrapping tightly around Cain. The silver burned on contact, searing through his tuxedo jacket. Cain let out a thunderous, pain-filled roar that shook the crystal chandeliers. He dropped to one knee, his alpha strength momentarily suppressed by the toxic metal. "Cain!" Lyra screamed. "Take her!" the beta yelled, shifting mid-stride into a mangy brown wolf. The mercenaries closed in, drawing silver-coated blades. Lyra didn't run. She didn't cower. She reached the slit in her dress and drew the jagged bone dagger of the ash. A mercenary lunged at her. Lyra ducked under the heavy swing, her movements too fast, too wild for human eyes to track. She drove the hilt of her dagger into his temple, sending him crashing to the floor. Two wolves pounced. Lyra spun, slashing the nose of the first, using the slick marble floor to slide beneath the jaws of the second. She was a hurricane of silk and bone, defending the kneeling king, but there were too many. Alara watched from the balcony stairs, her eyes gleaming with cruel triumph. "You should have stayed in the woods, Lisa." Lyra stood over Cain, panting, blood from a superficial cut staining her blue silk dress. She looked up at Alara, her silver eyes burning with a light that wasn't human. "You're right," Lyra snarled. She turned and kicked a massive pane of floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the estate's sprawling gardens. The glass shattered outward into the night. Lyra stepped to the jagged edge, filled her lungs with the freezing night air, and let out a sound that froze the blood of every creature in the room. It wasn't a scream. It was a piercing, resonant, earth-shaking howl. A call to the wild, a call to her family. For a long, agonizing second, there was only the echo of Lyra's howl. The Crescent Wolves hesitated, their instincts warring with their orders. Then, the night answered. A chorus of deep, terrifying howls erupted from the edge of the manicured lawn. The shadows of the garden detached themselves, pouring toward the broken window. They didn't just breach the room, they flooded it. Dozens of massive, ash-gray dire wolves leapt through the shattered glass, their teeth bared, their eyes locked on the threats surrounding their princess. At the front of the pack, moving with slow, terrifying majesty, was the White King. He was larger than any shifter in the room, his fur gleaming like snow under the ballroom lights. He stepped over the broken glass and locked eyes with Lyra. "Ash," Lyra commanded, pointing her bone dagger at the Crescent Wolves and the armed mercenaries. "Protect!" The room erupted into absolute carnage. The Ash Wolves were not held back by shifter politics or human laws. They fought with ancient, brutal efficiency. The mercenaries' weapons were useless against the speed and sheer mass of the dire wolves. The Crescent shifters, demoralized and outmatched by true wolves, were pinned to the marble floor in seconds, whining in submission. Lyra didn't watch the fight. She dropped to her knees beside Cain. His skin was blistered where the silver net touched him. With bare hands, ignoring the searing pain as the metal scorched her own palms, Lyra grabbed the heavy mesh and ripped it apart with a strength born of pure adrenaline and desperation. Cain gasped, falling forward into her arms. The silver was off him, and his supernatural healing was already kicking in. but he was exhausted. He looked up at her, a fierce, proud smile gracing his lips. "My wild queen." Lyra helped him stand, leaning his weight against her. Together, they looked up the stairs. Alara was backed against the balcony railing, her terrified gaze locked on the massive White King, who sat patiently at the bottom of the steps, blood dripping from his jaws, guarding the only exit. Lyra walked slowly up the stairs, leaving Cain supported by the banister. Her silk dress was torn, her hair wild, her eyes blazing. She was Lisa Blackwood, the rightful heir, and she was Lyra of the Ash. Alara fell to her knees, weeping, her hands raised in supplication. "Lisa, please. I'm your mother. I raised you. You left me to be eaten," Lyra said, her voice cold and hollow, completely devoid of empathy. "You killed my father. You poisoned this pack." She stopped inches from Alara. The woman was pathetic, stripped of her guards, her wealth, her false power. "I won't kill you," Lyra whispered, the words hitting Alara harder than a physical blow. "Death is the forest's mercy. You don't deserve the forest." Lyra turned to the remaining guests. Human politicians and shifter dignitaries who had hidden behind overturned tables, watching the truth unfold. She conspired with the rogue packs. She funded terrorism on the border. "I leave her to your justice." Lyra looked at the White King, who gave a single, solemn nod before turning toward the broken window, leading the pack back into the shadows of the bloodwood where they belonged. "No," Lyra said softly, looking up into Cain's storm-gray eyes, her heart finally beating to a rhythm that felt like home. "It's just beginning." The Blackwood estate, once a monument to Alara's greed and sterile ambition, was breathing again. Lyra had ordered the heavy velvet curtains torn down and the reinforced security doors removed. The grand ballroom, where the silver snare had nearly ended Cain's life, now held a massive stone hearth, its fires burning day and night to welcome both shifter and true wolf alike. Yet, peace was a fragile, unfamiliar garment. Lyra stood on the balcony overlooking the dense tree line of the bloodwood. The winter air was razor-sharp, carrying the scent of impending snow. She wore a heavy cloak of obsidian black, the plush fur collar brushing against her jaw, but she remained barefoot, her toes gripping the frost-covered stone. Behind her, the heavy oak doors of the study opened. Cain stepped through, the low timber of his boots against the floorboards, sending a familiar, grounding hum through her senses. "You're freezing," Cain murmured, stepping up behind her. He didn't wrap his arms around her immediately. He knew her wildness too well. He always offered his presence before his touch. "I don't feel the cold," Lyra replied, leaning back just a fraction until her shoulders brushed his solid chest. "I feel the silence. The Crescent Pack has been too quiet since Thorn's death." Cain's brow furrowed, his alpha instincts aligning perfectly with hers. When Thorn had fallen at the parley, and later his beta in the ballroom, the Crescent wolves had fractured. But a wounded animal was often the most dangerous. "Silas has doubled the patrols along the western ridge," Cain said, his hands finally coming up to rest on her waist, drawing her flush against him. His body heat was a furnace against the winter chill. "The human authorities are still untangling Alara's web of finances. It seems she was funding more than just Thorn. She was supplying silver-laced weaponry to fringe rogue factions." Lyra's eyes darkened, the silver irises catching the moonlight. "She armed them against the Ash, and against me," Cain added softly. He turned her around, his hands moving up to cup her face. "But we broke the snare, Lyra. Ilara is locked away in a high-security human prison, stripped of her assets and her mind, rambling about giant wolves to guards who think she's insane. "It doesn't end with her," Lyra whispered, resting her forehead against his chin. "The forest is restless. The White King hasn't visited the edge of the woods in a week. They are tracking something." Before Cain could reply, a sharp, piercing howl tore through the night sky. It wasn't the deep, resonant call of the ash. It was frantic, high-pitched, and laced with panic. A shifter patrol. Cain's head snapped up, his gray eyes flashing to a vibrant, predatory gold. Western Ridge. Lyra was already moving. She dropped the heavy cloak, revealing the practical leather armor she wore beneath it. Her bone dagger was securely strapped to her thigh. Then we hunt. The Western Ridge was a jagged spine of rock that separated the Obsidian territory from the lawless Badlands where the Crescent remnants had fled. By the time Cain and Lyra arrived, flanked by Silas and a dozen elite Obsidian guards, the snow was already stained. 3 Obsidian patrolmen were pinned down behind an outcrop of boulders. A barrage of specialized silver-tipped arrows rained down from the higher cliffs, keeping them trapped. "Rogues!" Silas shouted over the howling wind, crouching low as an arrow shattered against the stone near his head. "They've got a fortified position. At least 20 of them." Cain surveyed the cliffs, his jaw clenched tight. The rogues were using the weapons Ilara had bought for them. "If we shift and charge up the incline, they'll pick us off before we reach the top. We need a distraction, not a distraction," Lyra said, her voice eerily calm. She wasn't looking at the cliffs. She was looking at the dark, winding tree line that flanked the ridge. The bloodwood extended its gnarled fingers even here. She walked past the protective cover of the boulders, stepping into the open. "Lyra, no!" Cain roared, reaching for her, but she was too fast. She didn't run toward the cliffs. She ran toward the trees. As she moved, she raised 2 fingers to her lips and let out a sharp, multi-toned whistle. A hunting command she hadn't used since she was a teenager hunting elk. The rogues on the cliff spotted her. A volley of silver arrows arced through the sky, aimed directly at the solitary woman in the snow. Cain's heart stopped. He surged forward, throwing his alpha aura outward in a desperate attempt to shield her, but he was too far. Before the arrows could strike, the tree line exploded. They didn't howl this time. They moved in total, terrifying silence. Over 30 ash dire wolves burst from the underbrush, moving with a speed that defied their massive size. They intercepted the arrows mid-air, their thick, magical coats deflecting the silver that would have burned a shifter to the bone. The White King led the charge, a spectral blur of snow and fury. He leapt halfway up the cliff face in a single bound, his massive jaws snapping shut on the rogue leader's crossbow. "Now!" Lyra screamed, pivoting on her heel and drawing her dagger. The distraction was absolute. Cain and the Obsidian guards shifted in a chorus of tearing bones and muscle, transforming into massive, dark-furred wolves. They surged up the rocky incline, tearing into the disorganized rogue ranks. Lyra fought on 2 feet, a lethal dancer in a ballroom of blood and snow. A rogue lunged at her with a silver blade. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used his momentum to throw him off balance, driving the hilt of her dagger into his temple just as she had in the ballroom. The battle was brutal, but brief. Caught between the ancient fury of the Ash Wolves and the tactical dominance of the Obsidian Shifters, the rogues broke. Those who didn't surrender fled into the Badlands, abandoning their weapons in the snow. Lyra stood at the edge of the cliff, breathing heavily, watching the retreating shadows. The White King trotted up beside her, sitting on his haunches. He bumped his large, blood-stained head against her hip. Cain, having shifted back to his human form, approached them slowly. He was covered in sweat and rogue blood, looking every inch the savage king of legends. He didn't speak. He simply walked up to Lyra, wrapped his arms tightly around her, and buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. Pine, ozone, and survival. The White King watched them for a moment, let out a soft chuff of approval, and turned back to his pack. Spring arrived at the Blackwood estate, melting the frost and bringing a vibrant, pulsing life back to the territory. The grand gardens, once manicured into sterile perfection by Ilara, were allowed to grow wild. Wildflowers bloomed over the old stone paths, and the boundary line between the estate and the bloodwood blurred until it was indistinguishable. Tonight, the estate was lit with thousands of lanterns, strung through the trees and casting a warm, golden glow over the massive gathering. It was not a human gala. It was a pack ceremony. Obsidian shifters mingled freely with the few human staff Lyra trusted, while on the fringes of the light, the glowing eyes of the Ash Pack watched over the festivities, silent guardians of their princess. Lyra stood before the large stone altar that had been erected at the edge of the forest. She wore no silk or diamonds. She wore a gown crafted from soft, white deerskin, intricately beaded with the symbols of both the moon and the forest. Her hair was loose, woven with fresh wildflowers. Cain stood waiting for her. He wore ceremonial leathers, his broad chest bare, revealing the ancient runic tattoos of his bloodline. His eyes were locked onto hers, burning with a devotion so fierce it made her breath hitch. As she stepped up to the altar, Silas stood before them, holding a silver chalice filled with water from the heart of the bloodwood. We gather to witness the binding of two souls, two worlds, two crowns. Silas's voice boomed over the silent, reverent crowd. Cain took Lyra's hands in his. His thumbs stroked her knuckles, a silent promise of forever. I, Cain of the Obsidian, take you, Lyra of the Ash, as my equal. My queen, my mate. Where you run, I will follow. What you protect, I will defend. Lyra looked up into his storm-gray eyes. The feral girl who had survived on fear and blood was gone, replaced by a woman who had forged a kingdom from her own scars. I, Lyra of the Ash, take you, Cain, as my king, my anchor, my mate, she replied, her voice steady and clear, ringing out over the trees. My wildness is yours. My heart is yours. Until the forest reclaims us. Silas dipped his fingers into the chalice and pressed the cool water to both their foreheads. As Cain leaned down to seal the vow, a deafening, unified howl erupted from the tree line. The ash wolves were celebrating. A second later, the obsidian shifters threw back their heads and joined the chorus, a magnificent, earth-shaking roar that echoed across the borderlands. Cain's lips met hers, silencing the world around them. It was a kiss of absolute certainty, a merging of human vulnerability and supernatural strength. The legend of Lisa Blackwood, the girl left to die, faded into obscurity. In her place wrote Queen Lyra, a sovereign who bridged the gap between humanity and the untamed magic of the wild. Beside Alpha King Cain, she built an empire where the vulnerable were protected and the corrupt were punished. They ruled for decades, their love story whispered among packs and villages alike. A testament that the darkest betrayals can birth the most brilliant, unbreakable power. Thank you so much for reading the complete, extended saga of Lyra and Cain. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey of revenge, wild magic, and Alpha King romance, please hit that like button to support the story. Don't forget to share it with your friends who love epic werewolf fiction. and subscribe to the channel for more immersive, real-life feeling audio dramas and stories. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear more stories set in the Obsidian and Bloodwood universe.